Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with Andor Season 1, Episode 5, The Axe Forgets, the second of two in the heist arc of Aldani. I really wish Disney Plus would stop randomly turning off subtitles. I have to manually turn it on every single episode. I'm sorry to complain about such a little thing, but you'd think with all the money and power of God himself, you'd think that Disney could actually do something about having a proper front end for their primary streaming service moving on. Getting back to this section, it's happened to be every single episode, Clays. 100% of them. It's been really frustrating me. So, could be, Clays. I don't know. They could try to do something clever. I've seen some companies do a thing where they try to bake options in amongst certain types of cookies. You know, the kind that have nothing to do with options. So that way it's all or nothing, right? You get the ability to save your settings, and also we scrape your data, or you get nothing. Because I've seen companies do that. That's speculation. I have no idea. So we see the tears thing again. We cut to Cyril. Finally heard his name spoken out loud for the first time. Episode 6, or 5, excuse me, 5. Episode 5. Yeah. So Cyril is in tears, staring out, and he actually gets just a little snippet of the sun. And I absolutely love that, by the way. I love everything about Cyril and his blue milk cereal. I really do. Because it's so perfectly pathetic. Which absolutely suits the man who thought of himself as the main character of the beginning of his own Star Wars film. Just sitting there in his tiny apartment, not even appreciating it. He has no comprehension for how rich and opulent that actually is. He could see the sun earlier, which is actually why I specifically drew attention to that. He got to peek at the sky. And I know that sounds so pathetic, but this is Coruscant. And so he's eating cereal with his mother. And this scene, it's hard to even dissect it because it's so nuanced that I can't say anything about it without having to add asterisks to that. What we see here is the kind of person I've seen in real life many times. A caring and considerate individual who is doing so in a very strange and frankly toxic manner. People who have their own problems and issues which matter to them, but demonstrate a total disconnect from reality and the world in which they reside. And the mother, oh, she does so good. Yeah, the mother is entirely too familiar, and that is all I will say to that. There's this wonderful argument. I want to bring up one thing about this scene. She completely bulldozes past the fact that her son is clearly traumatized about all this. Browbeats him, insults him. He actually mentions, I kept a guest room. You could have come visit at any time. And her response is, oh, that's no invitation at all. And what's really strange about all this is you can see both sides of the argument. You can visit anytime you want, which is an open invitation, but she demands a specific invitation, which says a lot about how messed up she is. And yet he obviously had no real desire to do anything with her, so he never actually reached out for that specific invitation. Not that I feel that, you know, any particular drive to have any interactions with her myself, so I kind of see where he's coming from on this. And yes, you'll notice the theme continues. Pressing down. Pushing down on those below you, even if it's your own child. And yes, I love the contrast between this woman and Cyril and Marva and Cassian. Once again, just like with Husbandman, I didn't actually catch his name. I absolutely see how Cyril is in many ways a product of his environment. He probably does have some degree or another of OCD. I've mentioned that, and I stand by that. But you could tell he didn't get any of the kind of help he needed. He didn't get any of the kind of circumstance he needed, or caring, or love, or assistance, or backing, or strength, or anything that is required for a person to survive, let alone thrive. And also, she flat out calls him Cyril. Nice name drop, by the way. It's towards the end of the conversation. And yeah, the dialogue is so wonderfully stilted. And he's so idealistic. I did notice the trooper toys, the Clone Wars troopers toys in his room. What I love most is how everything about his presentation makes it clear that he wants to be anywhere but here. And being here is bothering him so much he can barely vocalize it. Oh yeah, Cyril is in prison. Cut back to Cassian. He wakes up, goes for the crystal, which is of course there. Skeen is looking over his gear, and we have a bit of an interesting scene between Skeen and Cassian, as the two ironically bond while sizing each other up. Cassian immediately notices the tattoos and sees what's going on with them. Doesn't say much, but the mere fact that one of them is called Cratehead says all it needs to. He's ex-gang. Probably ex-gangs, actually. And yeah, the fact that Skeen caught on to the fact that Cassian was able to suss that out immediately, but didn't call attention to it. Neither of them actually called attention to it. Skeen even mentions, none of them know. None of them know what this means. Cassian, I noticed the black sun, by the way. I caught that. Prison gang. Well, it's funny you say that, because then we cut to Cassian, who says, where were you sent? Sipo. Youth Center. 13 when I went in. And yeah, by the way, isn't that so wonderfully galactic empire? What do they call their prison? A youth center. And there's this wonderful bit where Skeen says, I never heard of it, and Cassian's just like, yeah, I know. And Skeen's reaction was, yeah, I guess they built a lot of fences, didn't they? The axe forgets, but the tree remembers. And there's always this wonderful bit. Everything about this conversation is so fantastically written and acted and directed. Working with other people is never easy. And Cassian then adds, it always breaks at the weakest points. And that's where Skeen's like, oh, you're right about the kids. Because it's very clear Cassian is in many ways something of a vet here. Which is hysterical given how low level he is, but says a lot about the group he's in. Skeen, meanwhile, is also something of the vet here. Both of them have more, frankly, worldly experience than a lot of the other people do. The kids, as Skeen himself says. And so, Skeen gets across the reality. Cassian is, of course, worried about them betraying him, and Skeen points out the obvious. We're worried about you betraying us, too. Doesn't push it too hard. Not really. Just makes the point. The Forest Owls, yeah. Idealistic, determined, driven, willing to push through for something they believe in, and that's admirable. But no skill, no experience. And then, God, the framing of this episode is so amazingly fantastic. I want to find this director and shake her hand. We actually, as Skeen and Cassian are talking, the camera makes a point of going over there, dragging to that direction, and looking at the hut they're walking out of. And when I say hut, I've rarely meant that word more. This is a bunch of tree logs that are propping up some straw. They're not cut, they're not shaved, they're not placed. It probably would be knocked over by a storm. Not even a major storm. Very next scene, Mon Mothma at the dinner table with her husband, framed by opulence and wealth. Yeah, it's a lean-to. Thank you. Later, I couldn't think of the damn word. Yeah, mats of moss. God damn. And what are they eating? Milk. Oh, God. It's just... Yeah, so hang on. So you're getting ahead of me, Rex, but yeah. So we cut back to Mothma. And I'm going to talk about this here because I have this tendency to forget to talk about things if I don't. I would rather talk about this later, but the theme of this episode, in fact, this arc, is actually so self-evident. Mothma is taking some terrible, terrible risks and doing dangerous and terrible things. It's not obvious, but she is. Credit to that woman. What she is doing is horrifyingly terrifying. She is trying to very, very carefully navigate amongst a sea of serpents, including her own daughter and husband. And she is trying to do everything in her power to back open rebellion, as well as more clandestine rebellion, and keep the legal framework of the Galactic Empire entangled just enough to hold back the tide of total repression. Remember, we know where this is going. In less than 5 years, the Senate's going to be completely disbanded. Gone. And then the Emperor will have direct control over the Moffs, the Grand Moffs, who will have direct control over the Moffs, who will have direct control over the territories. Completely eradicating that entire bureaucratic framework. This is insane, what she's doing. And I mention that because it's exactly the same thing that Cassian and all of the Forest Owls here are doing. Luthen is even in on this concept. What they're doing is terrifyingly dangerous, and they know it. It's risky, and they know it. They have a low chance of success, and they know it. There's a concept I am entirely too enamored with because I understand it from a real-life perspective. I call it the Fool's Hope after Lord of the Rings. Because if you've ever studied the Lord of the Rings movies like I have, first of all, you should. They're great movies, especially when you dig into them. But the central theme of the Lord of the Rings trilogy is a fool's hope. Something that can't succeed. There's no way. There's no way. So we meet Leda. I wrote down her name, but they only said it like once. It's her daughter. I don't actually remember that character from Star Wars, from the EU or the AU or anything like that. So I have no idea what she's dressed like her father. Did you catch that? Mothma's outfit has pretty much been the same general style of professional but curt. Obviously very wealthy, but, you know, doing her own thing. Daughter shows up. She's in the same kind of bathrobe-y thing. But yeah, the husband's just sitting back and smirking at this whole scene, enjoying it. And the teenager, who is super spoiled, is such an insight into where the husband probably was when he was a teenager. Just terrifying. And once again, that motherhood thing shows up. Mothma obviously cares at least enough to bother. And yet the daughter is pushing back hard. After all, she's nothing but a bother to her mother. She doesn't even insinuate it. She states it outright. You're free. Go. You don't have to bother. Go. I mean, why would you need to go to school? What possible benefit would there be from learning or understanding? Keep that in mind, too. I'm going to actually bring that one up later. Thank you, Paranoid Android, for the sub. Always appreciate. Give me one moment, please. You caught me a little off guard here. Alpha Centauri. Resident Evil Block. And Deus Ex Human Revolution. Done. Thank you again. So then Cassian goes for something. Goes to the drink. I think it's the milk. Yes, it is. And he sniffs it. And I've been meaning to point this out for 2 separate episodes now. Cassian has that habit. And I love that they consistency is key for these kind of details. Every time he goes for a drink, he just, it's very briefly, he sniffs it. And then he goes to drink it. That says all it needs to. Really. And for everybody paying attention, So he's handed the milk, sniffs it. And he does this several times in this very episode. Later when he's handed the alcohol, sniffs, then drinks, then hands it to Cinta, right? And then we have Nemik's manifesto scene. He was talking so fast that I couldn't possibly just summarize the whole thing. But honestly, I realized everything he's saying, I just wanted to copy-paste and share verbatim. I have nothing else to add, really, to everything Nemik said. I have nothing else to add. I actually wrote down a few specific points that jumped out at me, though. So he mentions how there's this old and true and steady. Now, there's this common lie when it comes to real life that older things are better, and that's stupid and terrible. But there is actually another thing, which has absolutely nothing to do with the age of a thing or when it was created. And that is the idea that something that was made to last tends to last. Let me give you a personal parallel. Just about 2 years ago, I had a near-fatal crash in my car, which was a 1995 Honda Civic. And that thing was a beast. It was a cockroach. Every time I took it to a mechanic, they would praise the sucker for being extremely well built, extremely well designed, and extremely prone to living through everything. Because it was designed to be durable, to be enduring, and to be the kind of car you could drive for 20 plus years, or 25 years, or whatever it was when it finally actually died. Honestly, if not for that fridge in the middle of the road, I'd probably still be driving it now. Now, is it better because it's an older car? No, because there's other older cars that are garbage. After all, the DeLorean predates the 95 Civic. But the point is, at that point in history, Civic as a brand was leaning on that idea. In fact, there's actually leaning on two things. Modularity is the other thing. But the point is, very, very, very reliable cars. You look at Civic now, they don't have that rep anymore because they don't do that anymore. But it's not because they're newer cars. They just stopped doing it. Reliable tech is reliable tech, period. That's the important part. You find something that is well-constructed, well-designed, that's something you hold on to. That's something you keep using several years down the road. Why do you think I still use this frickin'... Yeah, it's actually Subaru now. By the way, guess what kind of car I have now. Why do you think I still use this stupid keyboard that they don't even produce anymore? This is an old Microsoft keyboard from back when Microsoft made really, really, really good, solid keyboards that have lasted me for years and years and years. And yeah, the AK-47, all reliable. There's something to be said for reliable tech. And it's a lesson that a lot of people, I think, have learned at some point or another in their lives, at some level of their lives, whether it becomes to computer hardware or something as simple as a monitor or a webcam or a mic. Or even something really, really basic and banal they don't even think about, like what kind of cars they drive or what kind of pens they use. How many of you have a preferred pen or pencil type? Because that's the one that's solid. I do. I've actually got one of them right here. Papermate. Older Papermate, they stopped doing this, but Papermate was really solid. I've still got a box of these. You know what I'm talking about. And it's interesting the way he leans into that. Something built to work. Yeah, you know why I still use PS3 controllers? Those things are damn good controllers. You know why I still use these headphones? They don't make these anymore. I have a box of these because I recognized that they were getting phased out, and so I bought a bunch just in case. Actually, yeah, shoes. It's another thing. Yeah, because wireless headphones, especially nowadays, are just trash. Overpriced trash. You get the point. Now, obviously, yes, Sennheisers. I was actually asked about mics recently. My first thought was Sennheisers. I don't know if they even go that anymore. And that's the really funny thing. Because it dips in and out, right? Quality dips in and out. Like I just mentioned with the Civic. You buy Hondas nowadays, you're getting some overpriced, fancy piece of overly engineered, overly computerized trash that's going to break down in 10 years. You're getting Apple tech. You get the point. You get the point. Obviously, opinions can vary on certain matters here, but the overall idea is that a lot of us know what I'm talking about. At whatever level of society it is, we found something that's solid and simple. You know, I got a basic one. How about these things? I'm feeling very stupid because I suddenly can't think of the name, but whatever this brand is has been solid for making totes for a long time. So I've got like 5 of them right here, carrying all my office equipment. I think it is Sterilite. I think it is Sterilite. These things are solid. I used to have other types of brands and other things. Those over time broke down or fell apart, and I've just transitioned from having all my stuff in those, having all my stuff in these, because these things last for years and years while stacked, which is what I need. You get it. You get it. So that's already awesome. But then immediately after Nemec talks about that, and I'm sorry, I have to keep talking about this because I love how he's showing some kind of navigation tool because he's a navigator. And we don't know what that tool is or how it operates or what to work with it, but we don't need to. We understand almost every single person in chat right now probably understands Nemec's point, regardless of the specific thing they're pointing towards, right? I mean, if we want to keep this in fictional land, why do you think it is that the Y-Wings were so used for so many years? It's because those things are a workhorse. We've grown so reliant on Imperial tech. Oh, ain't that the truth? And do you remember what I mentioned earlier? The daughter just straight up skipping school. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Later on, there's this tidbit where where Skeen is giving some of his backstory to Cassian. And he mentions, it's this really quiet thing. It's kind of a side thing in the rest of the story, but one of the things he mentions was that the farm was a tree farm. Centuries-old trees just bulldozed over. Think about that for a second. Think about how much time and effort and organized work by dedicated, intelligent people is being done to slowly phase out the old in favor of what they approve of, whose entire purpose is to be what they approve of, to make you reliant upon it. 100% mortal. In real life, I don't want to get too much down the politics rabbit hole here, a lot of stuff is specifically built to be crap, either cheaper parts or things that can fall apart easier, or things that break at a certain time, or things that require certain things, specifically because of the fact that they want you to be a repeat customer. But in the Empire, it's the same concept. And yes, I am comparing modern corporations to the Galactic Empire. Come at me, bro. They both want the same thing. They want you dependent on them. They want you to be a repeat customer. Only in the case of the Galactic Empire, you are the currency. Whereas in corporations, your data is the currency. Light bulbs. Oh my god, light bulbs. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. Nemec keeps talking. There's so much going on and so much to say, and all of it is happening so quickly. The pace of repression outstrips our ability to understand it, and that is the real trick of the Imperial thought machine. It's easier to hide behind 40 atrocities than a single incident. I don't feel the need to add anything to that. I don't even have to point to modern-day real life for that. I study history. A study that's being slowly phased out in the country I live in right now, by the way. That's not hyperbole. Oh my god, 40. I can't summarize this. I can't summarize this scene. It does such a good job. There's this wonderful bit where Nemec is giving his speech. He's just speechifying and speechifying and speechifying. And then there's the price, Rex. Skeen says, I'd like to know what Clem thinks. And Nemec's reaction, he's not even in frame properly, and he's not even in focus literally, but Nemec's, I want to physically show. So Nemec's talking, and then Cassian's right here, and Skeen's back there in focus, and Skeen's like, I want to know what Clem thinks. And Nemec's immediate reaction is like, he's just all his body language is zoom, and he just hones in on Clem immediately. What are you gonna say? How are you gonna say? What's your reaction? Like, I feel that, right? I feel that. Like, to use a random parallel, imagine if I'm talking with Rax, and we're in the presence of Mr. Red, who is a total stranger for these purposes. Hello, Mr. Stranger. And then at one point, Rax starts talking about Kingdom Hearts. And then, as, you know, as we're talking, I look to Mr. Red, the total stranger. And I say, I'd like to know what Mr. Red thinks about Kingdom Hearts. And Rax's reaction is, you would, admit it. There's just this moment of interest. And the hard truth is Cassian actually is the ideal person to read. No, wrong word. To process, to take in the ideology that Nemec is practicing. Cassian hasn't been radicalized. He absolutely has the defiance. He does. Screw the Empire. But he ain't there yet, you know? Can I say one of the biggest reasons why the Han Solo archetype works? It's because people like Han Solo... Jesus Christ, from Vulcan. It's because people like Han Solo aren't bad people, they just grew up in a bad environment. And when they're introduced to the possibility of actually doing something for someone else, they tend to gravitate towards that. Because the alternative is so horrible. So even if they are purely selfish, they know, because they have a degree of intelligence, that they need to push back against that. Han became a believer in the cause through experience. Not through preaching, not through speechifying, just by actually living it. And look at what Cassian has already gone through. At this point, and I keep losing his name, and I feel really bad about this. Tereme? The second leader, the second in command. He's the only person whose name isn't burned into my brain, and I'm not even sure why. I keep losing his... They don't say his name very often. Yeah, Han grew up on frickin' Corellia. Terramin, thank you. Terramin, I was close. Terramin calls him over, and they start doing what's clearly supposed to be like a quiz thing. And I love... I mean, he is it, too, Thor. I love how Terramin and Vel lay this out like this is them testing Cassian. But Cassian, who one of his few things he's actually spent skill points in is his observant. He's very, very observant. He's a good spy, as it happens. And he's actually showed this several times before. He shows that in this episode several times as well. He realizes very quickly they don't actually know how to get this thing off the air. They don't know how to fly this thing. He accurately susses this out because all they have is the manuals. And the manuals don't list this information. This is said just a couple of minutes after Nemec's comments about how they're making us reliant on Imperial tech. Did you catch that connection point? The manuals wouldn't have custom works included. Of course they wouldn't. That's what you need knowledge for. That's what you need experience for. That's what you need to go to school for. Right? That is the kind of thing they teach in school, at least back when I went to school, which admittedly was 25 goddamn years ago. 23, excuse me. Yeah, Luthen wanted critical redundancy. He was actually right. They needed critical redundancy. The group was not quite there. It's no wonder he was in such a hurry and was willing to risk so much just to get Cassian on board for this job. So Cassian lays it out. He happens to have skill and knowledge. He actually is there to deal with this thing. Yeah, exactly. He used to live in a goddamn shipbreaking area, a salvage yard. Of course he knows about this kind of crap. Yeah, exactly. From all angles, this operation was doomed. Just like Mon Mothma's. I don't think I haven't noticed that parallel either. So. So he shares all... He tells them what's going on. And at some point, Vel tries to hammer down. And I want to point this out several times. This episode makes a point of emphasizing how bad of a leader Vel is. I don't mean that unkindly, by the way. I really don't. She does not know how to do any of this. And there's this wonderful bit where she tries to tell Cassian, you're going to do this. And Cassian says, no, I'm not. If you want me to stick my neck out for this, I'm going to be in the pilot seat. I'm going to fly this damn thing. Okay? He tells her what to do. The first time he takes charge, and not the last time in this episode. Then we start to see Lieutenant Gorn in action. Yeah, we can say it's your idea. I don't care. Everything about this scene is so amazing. Gorn I get such a Palaean vibe from Gorn. Is that just me? I'm actually really curious. I get such a Palaean vibe from Gorn. He's he's got the career military thing. He clearly wants something closer to an actual military. Gilead Palaean, he was a character back in the EU. I guess actually he has been transitioned into the AU in one scene, in one line, in one show, but he was a character back in the EU, a major character. He is pragmatic. There's this wonderful bit. Yeah, he's very professional, is actually what I want to get across there. He knows how to be an officer. He's actually a really good officer. I can tell you already that Gorn is a good officer, the kind of person who should be in a proper military. You know, a real military, not this nonsense. And you can tell how much it bothers him and how much he plays that up, too. And you know what's funny? You know what's really awful? As there's this line, the commandant's wife needed help moving for the furniture. Moving furniture for the dinner, excuse me. And I'm sitting here going, you know, in the EU, this was actually abandoned relatively early, but in the EU, one of the early ideas is the reason the military backed Palpatine's new regime was getting rid of this kind of trash. If I could pull a quote, I actually found this quote. I meant to reference it yesterday. Civilian orders under the Galactic Empire are now transmitted at the level of the sector group, from regional Moffs, Grand Moffs, or the Emperor himself. Smaller units are to receive their orders only from officers in the proper chain of command. This is a definite change from the Republican Navy, where senators or other politically powerful beings could and would commandeer naval vessels directly, sometimes entire squadrons, for personal missions or personal gain, without having the order come down through the chain of command. That kind of trash is the kind of thing that, in the EU, plagued the Old Republic, and was one of the major signs of corruption within it. Oh, of course the Jedi would do that. Of course they would. And so we see this kind of trash is still going around. The Commandant's wife is ordering around soldiers to set up for a dinner party. I don't know what else to say to that. We cut over to Blevin, who's looking over Ferrix. Actually, before I go any further, there's a long-standing rule about fiction. If you're doing a heist story, or any kind of plan story, there's two types of ways this can go. This is very, very old rules. If you share the plan, then the plan will go wrong. That's why you're sharing the plan, so that we understand how the plan is going wrong. If you don't share the plan goes well, so that we can enjoy the plan being developed as it's happening live. Very old rules. You could probably think of 100 games, movies, and books that follow this concept over the course of like the last 60 years. You'll notice they're kind of trying to have it both ways here, because they keep telling us little tidbits about the plan, but not the whole plan. Which probably means things are going to go very wrong next episode. Don't tell me. I don't even want to hint. I'm just sharing the rules of fiction. Then we cut to Blevin. Blevin's out looking over Ferrix, and the local garrison captain comes up and says, "Could I be made prefect?" The title, I know it doesn't come with extra pay. Remember that. This is also minutes after Gorn and his stupid thing with the garrison. And of course, Blevin's response is, "You can wear a ball gown for all I care." Oh, did you also notice that they're repurposing local buildings, local architecture, in order to turn it into a local headquarters? They mentioned it was a hotel. Looks more like an apartment complex to me, but it doesn't matter, because they're just taking it over. Just a term for that. Eminent domain, I believe, is the term for that. Grab. And yeah, that's just, wow, Huthor. This is actually why I brought up the professionalism of the military thing earlier, because one thing the AU has definitely been doing, not sure I like it, but I get where they're going with it, is that the Navy is absolutely like the Old Republic's Navy, aka hilariously and pathetically corrupt and incompetent. So, there's this great bit. They're walking, marching in formation, doing a surprisingly good job of it. I was actually watching their feet while they were doing it. The only one who actually fussed up at all is Skeen, and they probably just didn't want to do a second take on that. And this is, of course, where we establish Cassian's observation skills for, I believe, the second time for this episode. Second or third. Skeen's left-handed. You want your weapon on the outside. And he accurately notices everyone's thing, and they're like, all right, fine, we'll readjust around. Notice this is also the second time he's kind of taking charge. He just gives a suggestion, and he happens to be right about it, and he's willing to back that. Now, that's important. Here's an interesting thing that I hate to bash Star Trek Voyager. You know what? I'm not going to bash Voyager, because it's not really Voyager's problem. It's Jerry Taylor's problem. She does this all the time. Bad Voyager has this problem where they have these magic words that once you say them, like magic, people will just do what you say. All you have to say is, that's an order. How many of you have seen Voyager and know what I'm talking about immediately? That's an order. This is actually drift over from late TNG, which had the exact same problem, by the way. So that drives me bonkers. I hate that crap. So the reason I bring that up, though, is because a lot of writers don't understand what being a leader, being in charge of someone else actually means. You need to establish that they have a reason to listen to you. You need to establish trust, and you need to establish that kind of respect. And that means, especially in a situation like this, that you need to actually have some kind of reasoning. You need to be able to back your play, in other words. So when Vel says, hold up, recognizes that Cassian has a point and says what's going on, she is increasing the amount of trust she has from Cassian by willing to listen and hear his play. And when Cassian backs his play, Vel backs it too, because Cassian has shown his work. That's actually both of them demonstrating leadership here. Oh, he doesn't actually have their trust. We'll get to that scene. And then there's a tie. One TIE fighter. I love that scene. I love everything about that scene. Everything about that scene is just perfect. I'm sorry. I have no demonstrables. I have no histrionics. It is just perfect. You can hear it in the... It might even be the same one, doing his patrol quotas. You hear the one tie being the kind of thing that could absolutely destroy all of them forever. This could be the end of their entire plan. Hide the guns. First thing, hide the guns. Comes over, zooms over, probably notices them, decides to buzz them, just to be a dick, or maybe because he's bored. Like, I'd say it's deliberate oppression, and it is, but not from the TIE pilot. As weird as that sounds, remember, that's not how that works. The people up push down, who push down, who push down, who push down. Right? And yeah, Nemec's responding quote. Yeah, it's systemic. That's what's so terrifying about it. That one TIE pilot is just bored or trying to take it out on someone below him. Just like the bullies who started off this entire thing back in the corporate sector. Then we cut to Gorn at the base. Lovely transitioning shot, by the way. The TIE goes back, and then we cut to the TIE coming back to the dam, which is where Gorn is, Lieutenant Gorn is. This is probably the most overt scene here, but it also ties back into something that Cassian himself said. You know, Luthen's like, how'd you steal that? And Cassian's like, it's easy, isn't it? Dirty your hands a little bit, wear the right uniform, walk the right way. They don't care. They don't even imagine that you exist, that you can exist. Cut back to Gorn. Gorn's talking to the corporal. Corporal racist, we're going to call him. Or I guess this would be specious, but it doesn't really matter. And Corporal Racist is talking about... Like, they're so casually talking about how the number of Aldani coming through here has been getting smaller and smaller. We don't need to know the specifics of why, because we already understand the generals of why. And then he mentions even just a few hundred of them. Yeah, exactly, Rex. Even just a few hundred of them, you can still smell them. Literally calls the locals stinky. Very mature. Can you even imagine 1,000 of them here? The best part of all this is Gorn doesn't even have to break character or lie to this man, because the corporal cannot imagine that anyone is anyone other than himself. He is so stuck up, so familiar with himself. He can't even notice that there's a rebel standing right next to him, I hope. Still not sure about Gorn. I hope he is, though. Because, yeah, this is just banter. This is just him. This is just a thing. That's all this is. There's nothing special about this. Of course his superior agrees with him. Why wouldn't he? He's his superior. There's only us, after all. I hope I'm right about Gorn. I have a whole paragraph listed here, but I'm actually not going to read it. I'm just going to say, I hope I'm right about Gorn. So, scooching forward a little bit. Yeah, no, I just... Corporal Man. Yeah. It's one of those fascinating things, because on the one hand, it's not really Corporal Man's fault. It is the system's fault for encouraging and pushing this kind of abuse. On the other hand, it is 100% Corporal Man's fault. He is in charge of his own actions, after all. So... Cut to Cassian and Skeen. Skeen grabs the knife, grabs the Kyber crystal. Cassian does not take that very well. Vel comes down on both, and probably doesn't really realize just how precarious her position overall is. Oh, actually, no, I skipped ahead. I'm sorry. I skipped ahead. I apologize. Skeen is really pushing at Cassian. Sorry. We'll come back to that. I apologize. I skipped ahead of my notes. First, we cut to the ISB. Blevin is back, just doing another day in the office, because this is just another day in the office, which is then immediately contrasted by... Have they named her yet? Yennefer Lady, who is trying... He's like, she's dedicated, she's driven, she's going to prove that this is all coordinated, that this is all organized, that there is a rebellion. Kessel, Fondor, Jakku. It's too spread out to be organized, but that's how I do it. Spread it out. Never climb the same fence twice. It's so Cyril. And I know this is the obvious comparison to make, but it has to be made. That people like Cyril was an incompetent boob. But this woman actually has a degree of competency at her back. That's why she's being pushed so hard and so further forward. That's why she was pulled out of enforcement. Right? That's why her boss is actually marking her for potential promotion. Why she got away with a little more than a slap in the wrist when she actually decided to play at internal politics. Yeah, she is a competent Cyril. And you'll notice that the statement, "it's too random to be random," is terrifying in its own right. Because it could all be absolutely nothing. It could be nothing. It could just literally be random stuff. Coincidences do exist and happen. That's a real thing that happens. I can name two. I'm not going to because it's too private. But there are two coincidences in my real life that are shockingly coincidental. I would almost call them miracles, but they're just coincidences at the end of the day because that's how that works. But they're obsessing over it. They need to figure out what's going on here. It doesn't fit. So, she takes the caffeine pills, or whatever it is she takes. I love that detail, by the way, and decides to work a little bit late. So dedicated to finding those germs and dealing with them before they actually cause a disease. Cut to Nemec and the group. This is when we see another one of the drink sniff scenes. Passes it on. Do you notice that Vel says to Rebellion? I think she actually says to the Rebellion. Nobody else responds except for Nemec. Cyril has another conversation with his mother. Oh my god, it's so amazing. I have nothing else to add to this scene. I know that's pathetic. I know that's kind of a cop-out. But this second scene with Nemel and his mother is poetry. It's uncomfortable. It's unpleasant. It's dark. It says so much about the horrible life he led. You notice, His father isn't even mentioned once. His uncle is several times. His uncle is looking into the situation. We also get the implication that his mother has been yelling at the uncle, that the uncle was probably not receptive to the overall thing, and that she had to actually get vocal about it. It's hard not to hear you. Yeah, Dad's probably long dead. Who knows why? Who cares even? And yeah, her disappointment is such a... her son is such a disappointment to her. It's making everything so hard for her. Why does he keep eating cereal? I actually have a theory about why he keeps eating cereal. It's actually a twofold. Reason number one, it infantiles him. Probably being done deliberately in universe for her to treat him like he is a little baby. But actually, I've got a second reason. It's a quieter reason. Cereal, as a food product, is usually very heavily processed, and usually freeze-dried or stored in airtight containers. Why is that significant? It means cereal can stay good for a really long time, especially if you have proper storage tech, which Star Wars probably does. Milk is also an extremely easy to maintain and transition resource. What I mean by that is cereal and milk are easy to mass produce and mass distribute. How many people eat cereal when it comes to this setting? Like, think about that for a second. Exactly, Bionic Punk. His mother lives in a nice area, but she's not exactly well off. Her tiny-ass apartment gets that across quickly. Did you see how tiny Cyril's room is? Yeah, who eats fresh food on Coruscant? I'll tell you who does. Mon Mothma. The courts. The senators. That's who eats real food on Coruscant. Think about it. Think about it. I know this is such a minor thing, but you know me in food. Hi, Evo. You know me in food. There is so much here being showcased by a bowl of cereal. There's so much being demonstrated by that tiny little insignificant nothing. Coruscant has to feed trillions of lives. I think it's trillions. I might be wrong on my numbers. Please forgive me. It's a lot. And they have to import all of their food. So they have to import in bulk. The only people who can afford to actually eat real food on that planet are the upper crust of the upper crust. 3 trillion. I was right. It is in the trillions. There's this wonderful bit. Oh, I wish I had my books handy. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second, please. You ever need to know how much I used to read? Look how dog-eared this thing is. Please forgive me. I want to share a specific thing. You know me in food. I've actually told other people as one of the most common bits of writing advice I tend to give people. Just think about the food. Food is one of the easiest ways to do world building and one of the most effective. When you think about food, you think about culture, you think about production, you think about technology, you think about magic if it's applicable. You think about distribution. You think about production. You think about wealth. Yeah, food is so much of culture and society and environment and civilization and technology and progression and interactions. There is so much that food connects. What do they eat? How do they eat it? Why do they eat it? I don't remember. The problem is Steve Perry has this really unusual writing style where he just bounces the camera around rapid fire and constantly, which I actually really like as it happens, but it makes it very hard to find a very specific thing. I'm so sorry this is taking me too long, but it's such a wonderful scene, I have to share it. What's worse is most of you probably know the exact thing I'm looking for. There's a lot of perspective characters in this book, too. This is Shadow of the Empire, the book. I guess, sorry. I hate to have to clarify that, but Shadows of the Empire was like 3 or 4 different things. It was supposed to be a whole project, didn't actually quite succeed at it. Still got some good stuff out of it. I'm sorry, Act. I have failed you for the last time. "We'll have dinner at the Minari," says Shizor. The coach lifted and swung smoothly up to the traffic pattern, bracketed front and back by bodyguards in their own air speeders. There was a restaurant that catered to the wealthy and powerful on a spire near the park, and from the shelter of the building one can view the mountain. Even see through the restaurant's transparent steel walls the religious fanatics who maintained vigil over the peak to prevent tourists from stealing the bare rocks for souvenirs. One booked reservations for the Minari months in advance, and only if one's name was on the approved list. It was the most exclusive restaurant on the planet. Exclusive, but even so, no matter how crowded the Minari, no matter how much it might upset a rich man to see an empty space where he'd waited months for a chance to dine there, a place was always kept open for Prince Shizor. If he took it upon himself to drop in, he was ushered to his private booth without delay. To most of the diners, Shizor would be nothing simply another wealthy shipping magnate, no more important than the 1,000 other rich beings in the Imperial Center. They would wonder why he deserved such treatment when they did not, given that many of them had more credits in their accounts than Shizor. None of them had more money than Black Sun. Besides, Shizor was one of the place's owners, though that was not common knowledge, and word had filtered down from the top. If Prince Shizor had to wait to be seated, the manager who allowed such stupidity to occur will be looking for another job before he can stammer an apology, if he is lucky. Shizor smiled as the coach looped away from the central nexus towards the mountain. He did not often flaunt his power, but good food was one of his small pleasures, and there was no cuisine better than that of the Minari. The fleek eel was good. Kept alive until the moment of being dipped in boiling pepper oil, the eels would have been light years away and swimming in the Hakuim Sea that very same morning. Also, the stuffed yam with plicto steak was excellent, and the giant Ethorian snail and flownut butter. Or maybe the Kashik land shrimp? So many choices, none of them bad. Well, rather than order in advance, maybe he would just wait until the restaurant decide then. True, he would have to wait for it to be prepared, but then patience was one of his virtues. Yes, that was what he would do. He would be spontaneous. It would be refreshing. Food. And it does such a wonderful job of explaining everything. I hate to analyze a book, but if you're paying attention, a lot was just conveyed very, very quickly. The significance of the mountain, the fact that someone somewhere is rich enough to be able to put a restaurant on the single most exclusive and relevant landmark on an entire planet. The descriptions of the food itself, the idea of the fact that he has the ability to wait for his food. I know that sounds like such a minor thing. How many of you understand the luxury it is to be patient with food? I suppose I should raise my hand on this one, because some of us eat when we're hungry, or when we can. He also gets a choice of what he eats. How many of you understand that particular luxury? And obviously it's this super rich, super expensive place where he's able to actually bump off someone to get there, but that's all obvious. I don't have to explain that. The mere fact that he has the ability to do this is its own thing, but it says so much about what the actual upper crust life is like on Coruscant. And it does so much wonderful world building in just a page and a half. Forgive me for the derailment. Cereal. Cyril is eating cereal. Processed, cheap, mass-producible. And yeah, notice that this is someone who's being showcased at being pretty much at the upper end of what we've seen. Cyril is in a nice place with you know, a decent view and not having to worry about a job and just, yeah. Then we cut back to the lieutenant. A lieutenant is not exactly a small-scale individual. Yeah, I know Cyril is middle class. Really think about that. Really think about that. A lieutenant is not exactly someone who's low-scale when it comes to a military career, especially in the Galactic Empire. But we also hear a little bit of Gorn's story, very briefly. We've already seen much of Cassian's own little story. Like, everyone's got a story. Everyone has their own rebellion. But that's the point, isn't it? Remember what Nemec said earlier? Everyone has... hide behind 40 atrocities. How many of these individual lives have been poked and prodded by whatever little thing they're doing today? They're even going to take down the dam. Move the airfield over there. Think about that for a second. And yeah, I'm actually with Rax. The whole point that I'm trying to make is that Cyril, for all his wealth and privilege and position, which he does have, it's worth noting, is all disgusting to him. He's supposed to be Luke Skywalker, not Bob from accounting. We also see that Gorn is a surprisingly good leader, which is shocking. Gorn has that whole thing where, you know, several of the personnel would like to see the big fancy sky thing, because, you know, duh, right? And he's actually willing to go ahead and allow them to do it. And not only does that serve his purposes, but he does it in a way that is actually rather amicable. In many ways, he reminds me again of the head of the head of the ISB department we've already seen. That he's willing to actually work with his people, be reasonable with his people. It's actually really kind of a cool scene and says a lot about Gorn. He probably really is a legitimately good officer. So, this is when the scene earlier that I screw up it is. Skeen finally finds the Kyber crystal. Shink. Oh god, I know, Orenix. Or excuse me, Oculus. Still working on it. Gets the Kyber crystal. Big confrontation scene. Who brings a treasure to a robbery? Certainly an interesting question, actually. And note what Vel does. Not that she's a bad leader, more like she's a developing leader. And there's a difference between those two things. But I bring it up. It is, Huthor, I agree. Well, I bring it up because Vel doesn't really do a good job of taking ownership of the situation. In fact, she kind of fails at it. She just yells and says, we'll deal with this later. And that's it. It is Cassian who, for the third time in this episode, shows demonstration of being a good leader, a good squad leader. Someone who's able to actually inspire people. Why? Because he's honest with them. He's not completely honest. He doesn't sell at Luthen, which is actually pretty smart of him. But he sells out everything else. I was hired to do this. I love this discussion. He talks about fear, about how this is a big deal. He talks about, of course he's afraid. Of course, this is this whole thing. And they're all like, we're in this for the rebellion. He's like, no, I'm not in this for that. Are you kidding? For something like this? I'm being paid well for this. And he controls the conversation completely. We've already seen that he's pretty good at talking his way around and through things. So that's kind of what he does here. He just does it for a completely different purpose. Yeah, of course I'm scared, but there's a difference between being afraid and losing your nerve. And then he cuts right to the heart of things, rather effortlessly, I might add. If you want out of this, make a choice. Don't use me as an excuse. That's powerful right there. And the thing that it does, if you'll forgive me, obviously it's great and inflective and all that, but the great thing about it is, as an argument in a debate, which is what this functionally is, it is a great way to force the other side of that debate to turn their attention internally rather than focusing on you. Now, that can be done for benevolent purposes or antagonistic purposes, but that's the tactic. He has now posited a question without putting a question mark in his statement at all. Are you afraid? Do you want out of this? We then cut to Mon Mothma and the husband in quiet discomfort. And there's this wonderful bit where he says, you didn't tell me about the foundation. And she says, of course I didn't. Why not? Well, I didn't think you'd be interested. It's charitable. And he gives an odd reaction to that. I'm still trying to put my finger on him. Sex joke. But he's an interesting character in that he is so a product of his times, I think is the way I'm going to phrase that. He is clearly a product of his times, and it's interesting to think about what might be underneath whatever this is, right? Because that is what she just said to him was a slap in his face. It really was. It's actually the second time she insults him in this one tiny conversation. The question is, does he care enough to process that? Or to do anything about it? I don't know. It's hard to read him, because he has a really blank face a lot. I would hate to have Mon Mothma's life. She is dealing with trying to found an organized rebellion against a tyrannical regime that's been in power for I don't know how long at this point. I'd have to look at the timeline. I forget when the Clone Wars ended. And she's dealing with a terrible husband and a daughter who 15 years. Is that right? Clone Wars ended at BBY 20? Something like that? Ever dealt with blank face like that in real life? You're damned right I have. Yeah, you need... Exactly, Uthor. You need a blank face to survive in this world. And again, just like earlier, is he the only one to blame here? No. He still gets part of the blame. That's how responsibility works. That's how accountability works. But it is not universally his fault, is it? And that overwhelming vibe that is blanketing this entire work of the systems, carefully crafted and constructed by those who care and are competent enough to bother, all coordinating to craft this despair engine, deliberate reference, that is the Galactic Empire. We have a quiet moment between Cassian and Nemec, which is awesome. We have a quiet moment where Cyril is obsessing over Cassian. That makes sense. I'm actually not going to mention that, but we'll come back to that because I feel his thing. And then Gorn lights the signifier, and there's this wonderful build-up music. But then there's this tiny moment where Skeen mentions his history, and I wanted to comment on this very, very briefly. Skeen mentions that his brother was killed by the... there's a long version of the story. But they killed my brother. But did you notice what he mentioned during that story? It was an Imperial prefect who did that. Do you remember what the captain earlier wanted to call himself? I know the job doesn't come with any extra pay. This is encouraged. This is systemic. This is the system working as intended. And this prefect decided to go ahead and flood a farmland. Didn't actually kill the guy, of course. That's ridiculous. That might incite rebellion. That might cause problems. No, instead, he just decides to flood the tree farm. For whatever purpose. We don't know the purposes. It could have been just an act of oppression. It could have just been bullying. Maybe it was repurposing. We've seen a lot of repurposing in these episodes. The Empire taking something and saying, oh, this would be better used as this. And then they change it. Technological, civilized, cultural assassination. So he filled his pockets with stone. Hell of a way to call something suicide. Yeah, maybe he just wanted a fishing pond. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's the really messed up part. We don't know why that prefect did that, and it doesn't matter. Brother's dead. Skeen's part of the rebellion now. Cool. But think about this. Notice that he mentions that what was taken out was pepper trees. Centuries of them. I've talked about this concept before entirely within a real-life perspective, but it came up once during Horizon Zero Dawn. You'll get it if you've played it. It is a terrible and quiet thing to see art and history and books and knowledge destroyed by the ignorance of the temporary and the small. It is a recurring pattern that people who happen to be in power now, and for the next couple of years, 4 years, 8 years, 10, will absolutely demonstrably destroy things that cannot be recovered out of ignorance or foolishness or self-preservation or an attempt to hold on to power, or even just because they didn't like the color of it or the style of it. Maybe they just wanted a fishing pond. It is entirely too real. It is entirely too frustrating, and I hate it. I always wonder in real life how much of real life history has been destroyed by temporary and ignorant men. Men as in humans. Yeah, exactly, Rex. Book burnings? I don't even know where to go with that. But then it prompts another thing, if we keep this within the realm of fiction. How much history and culture and society and knowledge and art do you think is permanently destroyed across the galaxy of Star Wars by the Galactic Empire across 19 years? 19 years is a long time to crush a lot of things. Final scene of the episode. We cut to Luthen. Wow. So many relics, and the relic touch-upping touch. As usual, he clearly does know what he's doing. He really does. I have to mention the holocron. I actually find myself wondering what Luthen's connection is to his secretary. I don't actually know her name. I don't think they mentioned her name. She's so awesome, and she's so clearly just in on this as much as he is. You know, I don't like to see you this nervous, which does a really good job of demonstrating exactly how much Luthen cares about this whole situation. How much he wants this to go well. How much he wants this to go properly. How much he's putting himself on the line here. Yeah, this is the first time we see Luthen be vulnerable. The entire show, actually. And it is really nice how much she understands him. You wanted this to happen. This is what it took. Tomorrow, this will all be over, or it'll just be starting. So what do we think? God, I've talked for an hour about this stupid episode. Having to go through the Shadows of the Empire probably didn't speed that up. It's actually my lunchtime. Oh my god, I don't even have lunch. What are we thinking? Oh yeah, I wanted to share something that may or may not amuse you. I got an offer this morning to do sponsored streams, which is, for those of you who don't know how this actually works, you have to stream a certain game, you have to stream it for X amount of time, and you have to say X amount of things about it, and not say Y amount of things about it, okay? That's how a sponsored stream works. I just wanted to mention that because here's the list of games that I was being offered to sponsor. Star Trek Fleet Command, Marvel Strike Force, Raid Shadow Legends, Puzzles and Survivor, Ant Legion, Call of Dragons, Roblox, Mech Arena, and Royal Match. Spot the common thread. It's all Mobage. Not all of those are exclusively on phones. You can play some of those on PC. But that's all Mobage, 100%. I declined. Perhaps foolishly. But that is still the decision I continue to make. Fool's hope. I think this qualifies for purple. It's just too good. It's just too good. And it has too many moments, too many oomphs. I agree, it's not quite as good as episode 3, but purple is a range, right? That's by design. Yeah. Everything about Skeen, everything about the framing of the contrast, and Mon Mothma, and sniffing of the drinks, and Nemec and his manifesto. Build-up is not necessarily disqualified from purple status. After all, I do someday hope to review some movies, and if I do so, one of the movies I would like to review is Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I guarantee you, there's a pretty good chance that those would qualify as purple. But no. I do agree. Let's purple this out. As a fresh reminder, I need to be reminding people about this. You can actually guess what the overall score is going to be of a particular show as we're going. You don't have to. It's just for fun. And, for example, we already know the score of Clone Wars Season 7, which is 47, was the score. There's actually a thing in the sheet over there. It actually shows the range. It's right there in the spreadsheet. So, for example, Andor can, at absolute most, score a 72. That would be if everything is purple. And the bottom range is the same for every show. 0. So, Arcane is 0 to 54. Clone Wars was 0 to 72. Andor is 0 to 72. Mandalorian is 0 to 96. Edge Runners is 0 to 60. And the Donkey Kong Country show is 0 to 24. And just in the guessing sheet, just go ahead and put which show and what number you want to put there. Blues are 1s, greens are 2s, yellows are 3s, oranges are 4s, reds are 5s, and purples are 6s. And, of course, Lamentations are 0s. Tangled, I'm not even thinking about yet. I don't want to think about that yet. No offense. That's a whole other bundle, and we'll get to that when we get to that. So, having said all of that, I am going to go ahead and have lunch that I don't actually have ready right now. So I'm going to be a little bit delayed in coming back is what I'm trying to see. But there will be a third stream today where we'll be covering Season 1, Episode 6, which I don't even know the name of. The Eye. Oh, that makes sense. See you in a bit.